Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very respected and best-selling author from California, USA, Lisa Bennett. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lisa is an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled, she's a co-author of a book titled Ecoliterate, which is with emotional intelligence expert Daniel Goldman. And she's got a forthcoming book, which is Mission Driven, Leading with Courage in an Uncertain World. And of course, she's an award-winning journalist, a speaker, and a coach. So Lisa, before we come to your books, tell me about your own amazing journey in brief.
Well, it was just a pleasure to hear about your amazing journey. So I'm happy to share a little bit about mine. Thank you so much. I started my career as a journalist, basically because I wanted to learn everything about everything. And I couldn't afford to be a college student forever. So that was my motivation there. And it was truly fascinating, and it exposed me to so much I don't think I would have ever been exposed to before. But soon enough, I found I wanted to dive a little bit deeper, and then you can in daily journalism. So I began focusing on books and collaborating with really interesting people. The first two people I did that with were the former presidents of Brown University and Cornell University. And then, came this big switch, which happened around the time that I became a mother. And my focus turned quite dramatically to the state of the world, and in particular, the environment and climate change. And, the funny thing that I often think about is that it almost could have not happened, this interest, because I hadn't been somebody who thought about the environment very much, to be honest. And then one day I was walking out of my office in San Francisco, and there was a man on the street with a clipboard representing some organization I no longer remember. And he stopped me and he said, "Excuse me, do you care about the environment?" And I was late to pick my son up from school. And so I kind of brushed him off the way we do. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have the time. And the next day there he was again. And the next day there he was again. And I heard myself saying, "I'm sorry, I don't have the time to care about the environment." And then it hit me. And, just the irony of I was so focused on the day-to-day concerns of my children, but I was not thinking about the bigger picture of the world they would go into. And that's when my shift focused to climate change, and more generally now to, how do we rise to face any of the great challenges of our world today?
How wonderful. How wonderful. And Lisa, how has your background in journalism influenced your approach to writing books on complex topics like emotional intelligence and environmental literacy?
Yeah, that's, I think that's a really great question, because I learned some wonderful things from journalism. I know, a lot of people have a negative opinion today. I have to say that the experience I had led me to recognize the vital importance of making complex issues clear and accessible to everyone, and the fact that that is possible to do. So, that was one thing. And then I had another, well, I should add, it's possible to do, but it's not easy to do, right? And very often we don't get it right. But I also learned an important lesson on the flip side of that when I was a fellow at Harvard's Center on Press Politics and Public Policy. And I got to dive in deeply to the history of journalism and how it influences opinion. And I could see that, of course, the other side is that it can lead people to draw very erroneous conclusions about complex topics. And I think that's one of the big things that we see now around some of these big issues, where people can end up feeling as if there's nothing they can do, and, cynical and the rest of it. And of course, there is always something we can do.
Wonderful. Great response. Thank you. So let's now talk about your first book, Ecoliterate, which you co-authored with Mr. Daniel Goldman. Tell me a little bit about the book and what was the important message that you want to communicate to your readers?
Well, first I should say, I was very fortunate to meet him while I was working for an organization called the Center for Ecoliteracy. And we realized that there was this great opportunity to, link the work that he has done on emotional and social intelligence, which really put it on the map, right? And taught people about how influential that can be in success in education, in business, in the military, even it's been used. Um, and to link those skills with the kind of ecological intelligence that we need in order to take better care of the earth and in turn ourselves. So, the message was simply that, right? That to further, many people, if you go back, I know it's still the case now, but especially if you go back a decade or two, people often saw environmental issues as very alarmist, right? And so it was very hard to break through. We certainly still see that now. And I think what bringing emotional and social intelligence to the equation does is it helps us communicate better about it by being aware of how some of these issues affect people, right? So building on that work is what I'm very interested and have been interested in ever since, so that we can really empower more people to feel like they can rise to challenges that can otherwise feel quite daunting.
Fascinating. And for my viewers and listeners, Lisa, can you share a story from Ecoliterate that particularly moved with you or has stayed with you over a period of time?
Sure. Yeah, I was very, very fortunate in doing the research on the book to be able to travel around the country to many different communities, from, the Arctic to New Orleans to New Mexico, and meet a lot of people who are doing really, really important work to further you know improves food systems, to improve energy systems, and so on. But hands down, there was one story and one encounter from that book that changed my life. And I had traveled to Eastern Kentucky to write a story about a group of people who were protesting mountaintop removal coal mining, where they set dynamite and blow off the tops of mountains in order to extract the coal. And so these activists were planning a sit-in in the governor's office. And for your listeners who don't know about Kentucky, perhaps, it's definitely a coal country. Coal is king, coal is the economy. So to see this group of 30 odd people planning a sit-in in the governor's office to protest what was such a financially important asset to the state, it just seemed a little like, really? And what really got to me was that there was a man present, Wendell Berry, a writer and poet, whose work has actually had a very important influence on the environmental movement over the years. And he was there dressed in a suit with his toothbrush in his jacket pocket, because he thought they might be arrested and he'd have to spend the night in prison and wanted to be able to brush his teeth. But here was this highly respected, awarded author, farmer, poet, and he's joining this protest. And so I went up to him and I asked him, I said, do you really think this will be successful? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know if this will be successful. What I do know is that's the wrong question.
Right. Wow.
He said, the right question is it the right thing to do? I know it's the right thing to do. And then he went on to say, too many people today focus on, will it be successful? And that stops the action.
Mm.
So that was a life-changing encounter for me.
Wow. Thank you. And that is so, so interesting. That's the right thing, the right question to ask. So let's now move, Lisa, to your forthcoming book, Mission Driven, Leading with Courage in an Uncertain World. And my first question is that from a book on the environment to a book on leadership,
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about this transition in your writing.
Sure. Well, another part of my background, I have worked in a number of organizations in leadership positions, organizations dedicated to the environment, education, equality. So I've learned some things about it along the way. But I have also realized that, I think one of the most important things right now is that people feel empowered,
Mm.
right? And we can all be leaders in our lives, in organizations, in families, and communities, and schools. So what I am interested in is, what are those insights related to leadership
Mm.
that can help people take charge and step up to these challenges of our times.
Well said. And how would you define mission-driven leadership, and why is it crucial today?
Um, I see mission-driven leadership in very simple terms. It's acting in the interests of something greater than our own self-interest,
Mhm.
right? And I deeply believe that that is something many people desire, to feel connected to a sense of purpose greater than themselves.
Mhm.
And of course, we see this in nonprofit organizations, they're almost by definition mission driven, but
Yeah.
we also see it increasingly in for-profit organizations,
Mm.
Ben and Jerry's, Unilever, and the poster child, Patagonia.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
recently transferred ownership of a $3 billion company to a trust,
Mm.
so that the profits will be guaranteed to go to fighting climate change.
Right. Amazing.
Right. So I think the reason that this kind of leadership is crucial today is, first, because we face so many big, complex problems that urgently need to be solved.
Mhm.
Second, because people are increasingly trusting business over government to help solve some of these problems. And thirdly, because many organizations have the clout and the resources to make a difference. So focusing on mission-driven leadership then is an attempt on my part, to honor those who are doing this work, and then also say, and let's spread this so that we're really normalizing this kind of leading with courage throughout society.
Well said. And you also focus on leadership in challenging times. Um, can you share a preview of what readers can expect? Because challenging times are there not just from the perspective of economics or climate or environment, but also in terms of the world. From a borderless world, we're becoming a world with borders. So I'd love to get your perspective.
Right, right. Well said. Um, I think there's a lot to say about that.
Yes.
What I would say that, so many people, hundreds and hundreds of people that I have spoken to about, what is happening in the world. Very common response tends to be overwhelm. I don't know what to do. It's all just too much,
Mm.
right? So you see people turning off the news and shutting down and cocooning and the rest of it, because, as you said, it's certainly not just the environment, it's certainly not just the economy, it's not just war, it's almost everything, right? We have polycrises.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, assaults on democracy, can't leave that one out.
Absolutely. Mm.
But, I think that what becomes really vital is that we reckon in a way I don't think we have yet with deeply why it is so many people feel powerless, right? People who really, really want a sense of purpose feel powerless in the world. And we know that research studies show, 1 out of 5 people feel disengaged, right? We know there are mental health issues that result from disengagement, like anxiety. We know problem solving goes down, the very kind of problem solving we need. So what I think is important in this whole context is that we're focusing on how to help cultivate more courageous, purposeful problem solvers. And I'll pause there. I can go on.
So one more question related to your books, then I have a few questions for you generally about your writing. My next question for your book is that with your focus on leaders and change makers, what common traits have you observed in individuals? And you just told me you've spoken to hundreds of people. What common traits have you observed in individuals who successfully drive positive change?
I think the two biggest things are first, a sense of perspective, right? Knowing that, the weight of the world does not rest on any individual set of shoulders, and yet we all have a part to play.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
And I think the second is a kind of true but radical sense of hope, which, is a very misunderstood word, right? Not wishful thinking, not just hoping for the best, but, hope that's grounded in a belief in the potential of people to rise to challenges. So I would say those two things. And if I can just add this, what I'm writing about in this book is kind of a 3-part framework that tries to dissect how we get to that kind of place of leading with courage. And I think it has to do with, taking a fresher look at how do we perceive big problems and our role, how do we relate to them emotionally, and then how do we make decisions about where to interact with them and engage in right-size actions.
Fascinating. My next few questions, Lisa, are now for you generally about your writing and writing style. You have contributed to a wide range of publications. How do you adapt your writing style to appeal to different audiences around the world?
Well, that's kind of what makes it fun. Trying to, as we said earlier, understanding from lessons in journalism that you can make anything accessible, right? And I think my career has tended to focus on a lot of complex, controversial topics, but I come at them from a desire to share, right? A desire to help, a belief that if you are reasonable and, if you are a decent storyteller and well-intentioned, that you really can communicate with anybody.
Right.
Almost.
Right. Great response. And, you also engaged with a broad spectrum of issues. Is there an issue you haven't yet explored that you're interested in?
Oh, I almost wish you wouldn't ask me that. I'm kind of afraid that I'll start thinking of those things. I usually have to bat away too many interests.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think I have my work cut out for me with this one.
I'm sure. I've time for 2 or 3 more questions. What is the most unexpected feedback you have received on your writing, and how did it impact you?
One of the things about writing that's interesting, as I'm sure you know, is, you can put something out and hear nothing. Right? And that's an odd experience.
Absolutely.
But I think what I've learned, one of the things I've learned is that you can put things out and hear nothing, but it doesn't mean it's not touching someone,
Yeah.
you know? And so I don't know that I have an answer of unexpected feedback. I mean, I've heard of people touched by things I've written.
Mhm.
But I just deeply believe in, the power of writing, because it's intimate. It's like a conversation like this, right? That where we can be talking from, across the world to each other, and you sharing it with your amazing audience. And it's a deep conversation, right? So this is how we connect.
Absolutely. And I've often also said that I have a lot of respect for authors who are willing to put their thoughts out in the open,
Mhm.
because every time you write something, there's a lot of laudatory comments, but there are also lots of brickbats.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you've got to be able to accept
Absolutely.
the good and the bad. So
Absolutely.
you're
Well,
absolutely
there's that quote about by Teddy Roosevelt about,
Mhm.
getting in the arena,
Mhm.
right, and doing the work. And I once heard Brene Brown say that when there's criticism, if it's from somebody who's not in the arena making an effort to make things better, she just doesn't listen to it. I thought
Mhm.
that was a great answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question to you, Lisa, with your extensive experience and insights, what is the one message you would like to leave with aspiring writers, journalists, or activists?
Well, I think one of the most grounding um, insights that I have ever come across was from Pablo Picasso, who said, "The meaning of life is to find your gift.
Hmm.
The purpose of life is to give it away."
Hmm.
And I believe that, that's deep work,
Mhm.
right? Doesn't necessarily come easily,
Hmm.
but I think that that provides an orientation that can encourage more of us to take up the mantle
Hmm.
of being mission driven and leading with courage in uncertain times.
Well said. And on that note, Lisa, and your amazing quote from Pablo Picasso, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. Thank you so much, Lisa, for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, Ecoliterate. Thank you for speaking to me about your forthcoming book, Mission Driven Leadership, Mission Driven Leading with Courage in an Uncertain World. I think I'm looking forward to reading your book. Uh, all the very best for its launch. Thank you also for speaking to me about so many diverse topics about your writings and all the great things that you're doing. Thank you for speaking to
Thank you.
me, and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.